Hello, everyone, and thank you so much for making the journey to come here finally. My dad is extremely happy that you're all here because he is a big ham, so he's very excited that you all came to attend. I think that we're going to go ahead and start. I do know there was a little bit of traffic coming here, so a few people might be straggling in, but I think for the sake of everybody sitting here and getting started, because so many people want to say their memories, talk about their memories. So I'm going to go ahead and get this started. And again, thank you all so very much. It would mean so much to my dad and myself. Thank you. I'm going to bring up Ray and Bev Washburn. Bev is going to come up and do some speaking. She's going to turn around. And they are from Whitworth.
Well, it's a pleasure for me to be here today. Jim was a close friend of my wife and mine. I entered Whitworth in the fall of 1956, along with Jim. And we were baseball teammates for that year. I was a basketball player and baseball, but I wasn't the best student in the world. So I missed the second year going to community college, but on my return in 58, I know I got to be teammates again. That was a value to me. We also were roommates. Jim influenced me a lot and got my studying back on track. So I mean, for me it was above decent grades, so that really made a big difference for those last 2 years. And our baseball team flourished. That junior year, most people do not realize that we won the Northern Region to go to the Nationals, but the college, with no money to send us, we didn't go. It wasn't until the second of Jim and I's senior year, we defeated the Northern Region, and we went on a shoestring. You can imagine players in 4-player cars driving from Spokane to Sioux City, Iowa. And where we really flourished. And we brought a couple of pictures to show you of the team. And then the trip back was uneventful. Everybody just paid attention to what they were doing. And it was a great time in our lives for that. So we kept in touch with Jim over the years frequently. Visiting when he was his wife, and then when he's in the retirement home, we spent several times. We'd go down for different events, even go out to dinner at different places. And the last number of years, fortunately, we got to. Okay, at this point, I'd like to turn it over to my wife. She's got some comments she'd like to make.
I'm Bev Washburn, Ray's wife, and a good friend of Jim's. I swear to God, if it hadn't have been for Jim, we would make the 64-year anniversary. Jim was so much fun. I think on our last visit, we really talked about how he went to because he's from this little town in Emmett, Idaho. And so I looked it up on the internet, sweet little town, and he said a minister there, and I read this in the program, said, Jim, if you want to play football and baseball, if you want to play, go to Whitworth, because you'll be able to play. You're not going to be big enough to play anyplace else. And so why don't you go and try it out? Well, that was bingo for Jim. because in 1960, Whitworth football team went to Humboldt for a regional playoff. And then we had the big hoop-de-doo in Sioux City. And I'd like to introduce Rigger, who was on that team also, a good friend of ours. His wife was my roommate. And when they were asked to go to the tournament, Jan and I knocked on doors in every place we could go, collecting money so they could have something to eat crossing the United States to go play. So there are some fun pictures here. I told Jenny, this one picture here is just priceless. This is the championship team. And they had one uniform and it rained every day of the tournament. So you could really tell the mud and the stuff and it must smell really. So this picture is, we had our 60th reunion at Whitworth, and these are the guys, and Jim was there, and these were the guys that were able to participate. So, you know, he went from Jim Glennon to just be called Glennon. Yeah, that was, and I've never seen a teacher that had a following of students. I mean, and he remembered where all of you sat. That is the most amazing part, to just remember who you were, but where you sat in the classroom. So this is an honor to be here and to remember a very good friend.
If it's okay, I'm just going to stand here like the rest of them. I'm Sharon Ringenbaugh, and in 1966, my husband went from Evergreen High School as an assistant coach to Mount Rainier as the head coach. And the first person he connected with, of course, was Jim. And they had more than just the football in common, but they both taught history. And as a result of that, they did 1 year of team teaching. And because Jim was single, he came to our house quite early on the days that they would have Sunday night coaches meetings. And expecting a dinner, of course, and he was always welcome. And after about 1.5 years of doing this, he said, you know, he says, I haven't done anything for you. He says, why don't I take you and Doug out to dinner and maybe a movie? And he said, I know I'm going to feel like a third wheel because he said, I'm single. And he had nobody in mind that he was going to ask. So I said, well, I have this neighbor whose kids I have been watching after school because Lorraine did not get home until about 5. And I was a stay-at-home mom at the time. And so I said, would it be okay if I asked her? She's a single gal, and it would just be for the one night. And he said, oh, sure, I'll give it a try. Well, I wish you could have seen the look on his face when she came walking up our stairs in a white body knit dress. And remember, we were short shorts in those days. And he didn't react until after he dropped us off after the movie. And he said, you know, he says, I really enjoyed myself. Well, come to find out, earlier in the next week, Lorraine called and she said, Sharon, she said, I've got some questions about, you know, little what's his name? And I said, you mean Jim? And she said, yeah. And I said, what can I find out about it? And I said, well, he's from Idaho. He has one brother. He has a mother that lost her husband when Jim was only 6. And I said, I know that he played both baseball and football, both in high school and college at Whitworth. And I said, and that's just about it. And I said, why? Excuse me. And she said, well, he called and he wants another date. And I said, well, what's wrong with that? And she says, oh, there's nothing wrong, except that he asked to have the kids come along. And she had never had that happen before. And she paused and she said, I think he's a keeper. That was in December. They were married in March. And now comes the part that's weird. Because every time we went somewhere and we met new people, he always introduced me as, that's the lady who introduced me to my wife. No matter where we were, we could be out to lunch, we could be with friends that I didn't know before, and it was always those. When he introduced me at his last residence, which was Solstice, he wanted me to come at lunchtime so that I could meet all of his buddies there. And he forgot to tell them my name. He just said, this is the lady who introduced me to my wife. And so I let it go for a while, and then all of a sudden they were saying, hey lady, when they were going to ask me a question. And I finally said, you know, I do have a name. So I told him. I spent 2 hours with, this is tough for me because he's such a good friend. I spent 2 hours with him the week before he passed away. And I don't know how many times he said, you know, he says, I've got all these people coming to see me. He says, I've gotten all these cards. He says, they call. And I said, well, Jim, I said, you don't know what an impression that you've made for people. And I said, they love you. And I said, why wouldn't they? And I was just so glad that I had that time, you know, to spend with him. And our families did a whole lot together because he moved in, of course, across the street, was with us for about 10 years. And Lorraine and I, on Friday nights when the guys would go scouting, we would pile the kids in the car and go to a movie or do something fun with the kids. We went to all the football games together. We piled in our cars, and wherever they were, we watched the football games. And I guess the biggest impression I have of him, he had one fault. It was generosity. I know of at least 3 or 4 people at Solstice who he opened his checkbook for because of medicine that they couldn't get, an operation that they couldn't get, or a bill that they had to pay. And I lost my youngest son 4 years ago. And his daughter was a senior. Were you a senior, Brooke?
I was a junior.
Junior. Anyway, she had plans to go to San Diego State University where he had graduated from. And Jim pulled out his checkbook and wrote her a $5,000 check. And so you can see the impact, and just looking at out here, I know that Jim is up there listening. And Jim, yes, you can go tell all those people I'm the one who set you up with Lorraine.
Thank you to Sharon, who introduced my parents together. I am forever thankful to her. So thank you so much. We really appreciate it. And we spent a lot of time with Sharon and Doug and the boys. Lots of playing. That was a wonderful memory. So I'd like to bring up Doug Curtis.
Okay, just looking out there, I know most of you have no idea who I am. So I kind of come from his Brasilia days, and Dwight had asked me if I'd come over and speak a little bit, and I was thrilled to do it, although I feel pretty humbled about doing all this. In June of 1960, when the Whitworth team won the National Baseball Championship, I was only in the 5th grade. In Brasilia, had no clue about life or anything. I just grew up in a really small town. Pretty much my whole life was just Brasilia. But that's where Glennon ended up. And what was really ironic is that there were 3 people off that national championship baseball team that had a huge impact on my life. One was Jim, obviously, because he came and was my coach and my teacher in Roselia, but also Paul Merkel, who was the head coach of that team. I went on to play football at Whitworth, and Paul was the assistant football coach and was a mentor to me, and it was also my academic advisor all the way through college. Actually got me graduated on time, and it was also our Fellowship of Christian Athletes leader. I spent a lot of time in the basement of his house. Later, when I went back and coached at Whitworth, I coached at Whitworth for a few years before I went back into the high school. He was assistant coach there. It was really ironical about how much Paul Merkel was respected is that Hugh Campbell, I don't know if you maybe know some of who he was, but he was our head coach, and he was really pretty laid back, and he just had the kids call him Hugh. And it was, all of us coaches could be called by our first name, except for Paul. Paul was the only coach that everybody had to refer to him as Mr. Merkel, and that's how much respect he had for him, just the impact he had. Another person off that team is Don Cox, who was the second baseman on that team. And when I was coaching and teaching in Colfax, he became our superintendent, and he was one of the most amazing people I've ever been. He's actually in an assisted living place in Colfax right now. He's kind of struggling with advanced Parkinson's disease, and fell and broke his back just recently. But he was one of the most humble, best leaders that I've ever been around. He went on and became a professor at WSU, and then he was a two-time representative at the Washington State Legislature. But between Glennon, or Coach Glennon, and Paul Merkel and Don Cox, I have had so many stories of Ray Washburn and Noam Harding and all the people that played on that team. I actually felt like I knew most of them. I just knew about them and stuff. And Don Cox used to tell me stories about each one of them. And one of my favorite ones about Glennon, and this is a little bit off-colored, so you have to kind of bear with me a little bit. They were playing the Huskies. I'm not sure if it was his junior or senior year, but they were playing the Huskies over here, and he told me the story. And I asked him just the other day if he was really accurate about this, and he did say close enough. But, they were playing the Huskies, and they actually were ahead at a certain point in the game by one run, and they had 3 innings in a row. Don went into a lot of detail about this game, that they had 3 innings in a row where they left 2 people on base, but they couldn't get them to score. So things were getting pretty desperate, and they actually had a chance to beat the Huskies. And so Don said at the end of one of these one of the innings, he was coming off the field, and Glennon was down toward the end of the dugout and was really quiet, which is unusual for Glennon to be quiet. So Don walked up to him and said, "Are you okay?" And he said, "I'm praying." And Don says, "What are you praying for?" He said, "I'm praying it rains." And he said, "And I'm not just praying it rains, I'm praying it rains like a cow peeing on a flat rock." And I laughed so hard I never heard the end of the rest of the story. But a few years later, in 1964 is actually when I made it to high school. And Glennon was my coach and teacher. But prior to that year, I was an 8th grader. And in Roselia High School, it was a very small town, and there was the school, and then there was the football field, and it was kind of up on a hill. And then down below that is where my dad worked. My dad delivered fuel for several different companies. And so I would just go from school down to the thing, but I always made it up by the football field to go by, because I'd always enjoyed just watching Glennon, but I tried to stay out of his way. Well, one day I couldn't. It was in 8th grade. He saw me. He'd left practice, walked over to me and said, "If you're going to come to practice, how come you just don't suit up and play?" And then he just let me have it about why I wasn't on the team, and I was letting all these people down. I'm going, Coach, I can't. I'm only in 8th grade. And he looked at me and he goes, "Well, you better turn out next year then." And that was the very first conversation I ever had with Coach Glennon, and I just, oh man, I didn't know what I was getting myself into. But the next year, I finally got a chance to go to school, at the high school and play for him, and he just, I don't know exactly how to explain it, but I'd heard all these stories about him, about what it was like to play for him and stuff. And so I was scared to death. And he was just above, he was so magical in everything that he did. Our football field was up on a hill, and it was pretty high. It was the Virginia battlefield. I don't know if you ever heard of Colonel Steptoe and all the battles up there, but they'd find cannonballs and arrowheads and stuff like that under the field and stuff. And we'd have to walk up there or run, depending on what kind of mood he was in. And then he would show up in what we called the Batmobile. And he would come roaring over the top of the hill, this big black car with fins coming out the back. And he'd storm into the parking lot, and then we'd practice. And practices were memorable. But there was 3 things that he taught us that to this day, 50, 60 years later, I've never forgotten. One is that he just had this unique way of making you believe that he believed in you. He believed in us as a team, and he believed in us as a person. And it was number one. He believed in you. And I was a freshman, and I was playing with these guys that had been playing for years, and then in the spring I ended up being a catcher, catching like all these senior baseball players. But he believed in you. And that was huge. The second thing was he was very clear about his expectations, about how you were going to play with effort and attitude. But the most important thing that he taught us was you never, ever let your teammates down. And I just can't tell you how many times he said that. Never, ever let your teammates down on or off the field. But I think that was the most interesting about him as a football coach is that his classrooms are more intense than the football games and practices. I remember when I started going to class my very first week up there, everybody says, don't sit in the front row. Don't sit in the front row because if he gets worked up, you're going to get wet. and so I always sat in the third row, and he knew exactly where I sat. About 4 or 5 months ago, he was still telling me, I remember exactly where you sat. He said in the third row, and he said, how come you always sat in the third row? And I told him, I said, because I didn't want to get wet. But his classes were just, it was exactly like going through football practice. He had speeches by presidents and politicians memorized. And I remember just sitting in there and just going, God, he had it memorized. But there was one day in my sophomore year in U.S. history, I remember going to class, and we were studying, it was like 1920s, 1930s, and it seemed like the entire Scopes monkey trial, that's what we called it, or what he called it, memorized. And he actually played the role of both lawyers. Williams Jennings Bryant, he'd stand over here and be Williams Jennings Bryant, and then he'd come back over here and be Clarence Darrow. We were just, he had the thing memorized. And then the bell rang, and nobody left. Everybody just stayed there. They just stayed there and just wanted to listen to him. I finally got a chance to play a game after going through all those practices, and my freshman year was one of the longest weeks of my life because it was also freshman initiation week at our school, and the upperclassmen were pretty brutal. I remember the day of the game, they put makeup on me. I had lipstick and eyeliner and all that stuff, makeup and stuff. It was hard to get off before the game, so that wasn't bad enough. And then I broke my wrist the first play of the second half, and I remember it was a pretty impressive break. And they sent me to the hospital, and then the next morning at my house, Glennon was there. As soon as I can remember, he got there. The first thing he said to me was, "We tried really hard to get even with that guy that broke your wrist." I said, "Coach, he didn't do anything wrong. I was just tackling him." And he said, "Well, we tried to get even with him." And then the second thing he said was, "You're going to let her. I promise you, you're going to let her. But you're not done." And so he made me film and keep stats and all that stuff, for the rest of the year. There'll just never be another Glennon. After going through, and I only had him for a couple of years, and then he came over here for most of you. But it was a sad day when he left. But after I had him, I knew exactly what I wanted to do in my life. There's no doubt. I was really quiet and shy, and he used to do everything he could to get me to talk in class, and that was quite a struggle. I wanted to be a football coach, I wanted to be a history teacher, and I just wanted to go to Whitworth, and that's what I did. And then when I went back and coached, he came to almost every one of our home games. Even when I was coaching, when he was coaching over here, he would take the time to come to the games and stuff. It was just like, I know we're going to hear a lot of great things about him. I played in college for a great coach, Hugh Campbell, and some of you maybe know who he was. He played at WSU and led the nation in receiving, and was a professional coach for a long time. And I always wanted to get Glennon and Campbell hooked up. And about two or 3 years ago, it actually happened. Hugh Campbell was at a homecoming game, and they always had the Hall of Fame people, which Ray would be at, and some other people in his class was at. And Hugh was there as a guest radio announcer. And I had to leave early after halftime to go meet up with my brother. But Hugh Campbell texted me after the game and said, "I finally got a chance to meet your coach." He said he was walking up to his car and he was having a tough time getting in his car. I don't think he could find his car keys or whatever. And so I went over to help him, and he said we ended up talking for an hour. I said, well, you got off easy. and then Glennon talked to me later, and I don't know how many times he told me the story about that, but I asked John Cox one time what else he could say about Mr. Glennon, because he couldn't be here. And he said that Mr. Glennon represented the best out of Whitworth. That when people graduate from Whitworth, to me there was a big deal with that. And he said he represented the best. I never did find out if Whitworth beat the Huskies that day and it rained like a cow peeing on a flat rock. But maybe I'll find out today. But I really appreciate you having me here, and it's just great to be here.
Just a change to the program, everyone. I'm Debbie Matthews, and I was the class of 76, and I see a couple of classmates here. So you can change that. Yeah, there are a few groups back there. Yes, you're the class of 76. I was also, we've all heard stories from, and I call him Mr. Glennon. He will always be Mr. Glennon to me. I was raised that way. And so he's Mr. Glennon, and he would say, after 50 years of friendship, he would tell me, Debbie, I think we can go to Jim and Debbie at this time. I said, no, we can't. You'll always be Mr. Glennon to me. And we'll always be friends. If you've heard stories from him, you may have heard about his stories of the simulations that would take place in class. And he was very, very proud of these. I was also very proud to be part of one of those simulations. And if he ever told you about the simulation where we had a week. We had from Monday to Friday to form a union in the classroom. He appointed 2 spies, and the rest of the class were workers in the factory. And our assignment was to set up this union by the end of the week. I had a foolproof way to do it. We failed. The foolproof way is I spilled all the secrets to a spy, and the one I thought was a spy was not, and he may be here, and I'm sorry for not trusting you. He also took our senior year, so 1976, he took a group of students to Washington, D.C. for a week at Close Up. And this is a national program, and I think the year that we went, the cities were Seattle, Houston, and Charlotte. And high schools in those cities could send groups of students and a teacher and chaperones or whatever to Washington, D.C., and we'd learn the federal government, and we'd go into the Senate, go into the Department of Justice, go into all these different places. Magical trip. So we went along, and there were meetings of the teachers before they went, and he learned all about it. He came back to Mount Rainier, and he said, look, this is what we're going to do. And if you're interested, you know, have your parents sign a permission slip, sign up, and come along. There was another meeting prior to leaving where the teachers went and they had to turn in the names or the numbers so that the group could then make the flight reservations for all of us to go back to Washington, D.C. One school said, oh, we're so proud we had a competition. We have 2 students, a boy and a girl. They're going to go to Washington, D.C. Another school, you know, how many from Bellarmine? How many from Bothell? How many from various places? They get to Mount Rainier. How many from Mount Rainier? And Mr. Glennon raises his hand and says, I'll come up to the table later. And okay, so they went on and got all the information that all the students needed to have to be able to take the trip. He goes up to the table at the end and he said, okay, so how many from Mount Rainier? 43 students went with Mr. Glennon. And by the way, no parent chaperones, nothing. It was Mr. Glennon by himself, 43 students. Were there any troubles? He goes, no, there wouldn't have been any troubles or we wouldn't have gone. No trouble. We got there, we got back. We're on the plane coming back and the other faculty from the other schools, Bellarmine, Bothell, and wherever, Jim, where are you going to sit on the plane? And he goes, oh, I don't know, I guess I'll sit here. He said, okay, we're going over there because we know 43 students are going to be in your face talking to you the whole way back. And we want to rest. So that's what he was like. He was so engaging, from the first day I was in his U.S. history class and all the way through that first semester, and he talks about Teddy Roosevelt and the Rough Riders. He's standing on the desk, riding a horse, and the class is like, oh my God, is he going to fall down? What's he going to do? But no one fell asleep. No one looked away. We learned Teddy Roosevelt and the Rough Riders, and that's to his credit. Over the years, he and I remained friends. I spoke to him not too long before he passed. And, but over the years, we had a book club. He'd buy a book and send it to me. I'd buy a book, send it to him. We'd purchase the same book and then read them, and we'd talk about them on the phone. And naturally, if you know him, they were mostly history or politics, right? Thank you, Sharon, for recommending Where the Crawdads Sing. He goes, let's go for a non-history book one time. He goes, Sharon gave me this book, and I think you should read it. And I read it. It's like, thank you for the break. Thank you. In his teaching, he has a huge respect for the government, for the democracy, for what everybody has fought for this country to stand for. He was never quiet, well, about anything, but he was never quiet about that. And he was very much a huge fan of his family, where he grew up in Emmett, which happens to be less than an hour away from where I live right now. His stories about Lorraine and Ferlina and Troy and your kids, he just spoke with such fond words about each and every one of you. His brother Ed, Joni, I've heard lots and lots of stories about Joni and how he tried to corrupt her as she's growing up, and mostly with books and literature, of course. And he was the zeal, I saw the word zeal up here on one of the pictures. He taught, he lived with zeal, and he felt very strongly about lifelong learning and even cried. I saw him cry a few times on points in his life where he didn't know any better, and people were being treated inhumanely. And then when he learned about it, he would cry, and he said, I'm from Emmett. I didn't know, but I've learned, and I know better how to treat people. And that's just the way he was. He was all heart. And so I know that he didn't want a memorial service. He didn't want a funeral. And I had several conversations about him. It's like, well, A memorial service and funeral really isn't for you. It's for everybody else. And we will all have a big hole in our hearts that you'll leave behind. So I was thinking recently, what would he want? What would he want from each and every one of us? He would want that same zeal for life. He would want that same love for our families. He would want that same sense of humor that carried him through his entire life. He would want us to open our hearts to difference and how to deal with people in a way that's positive and giving of both sides. And most of all, he'd want us to vote. So as you learn, as you deal with other people, as you see other people's point of view and express your own, please think, have a heart, and vote. Have a great day.
I'm Christine Miller, I'm even, but to Jim I was always Chris Miller. And I was lucky enough to have him as my history teacher in high school, class of 71. And then about 25 years later, while I was working here at Highline College, he began working here, and so we became colleagues. And we had fun having lunch together and going to different events on campus together. And then later, when he retired, we continued to see each other going to lunch. And of course, it was always his rule that if he took you to lunch, he had to pay. And as he paid, he would always say, "Thank you, Lorraine," because she was the one who had the money that allowed him to do those kinds of things, lent him the money. After he left Highline, we continued to see each other and talk about politics and history, occasionally see movies together like Churchill and things like that. So I had a fun relationship with him and tried to be a support for him in his last years, and we spent some holidays together, which were fun. He became a mentor to me, a good friend, and kind of a surrogate father, and he called me his other daughter. I felt very touched to have that relationship with him. While he was here at Highline, he worked in the history department, and his roommate, office mate, was Tim McMahon, also another history teacher. Tim was unable to be here today, so he asked me if I would be willing to read something on his behalf. So these are Tim McMahon's words. Hello everyone, this is Tim McMahon, a longtime history faculty member here at Highline College. I'm sorry I can't be with you to celebrate Jim's life, but we are on a long-planned family trip right now. From the time I arrived here in fall of 2000 until Jim's retirement in 2011, we shared an office, so I got to see firsthand his interactions with students and how hard he worked at his craft of teaching. I first met Jim at a history department meeting just before classes started in fall of 2000. Kay, Dribble, Emmanuel, Chibi, Jim and I worked hard through the scheduling matters and various department activities. And as the meeting was finished, Jim was surprised me with the question, "Do you drink?" I wasn't sure what to say, but he seemed so friendly that I thought it was safe to admit that I did. The question was simply Jim's way of inviting me to attend the weekly gatherings at the Yard Arm Pub in Des Moines on Friday afternoon. I would become a semi-regular at those meetings until our kids came along, and my schedule was much less flexible. Jim always enjoyed those afternoons at the Yard Arm because they brought together not only his new colleagues at Highline, but also old friends and colleagues from Mount Rainier High School. Speaking of kids, Jim was there at the beginning, so to speak. When my wife Paula and I were looking into adoption, we needed letters of recommendation as part of our paperwork package. Jim wrote one of those letters for us and described us as such wonderful potential parents that we have still been trying to live up to those words, and often failing. When my son Jameson was about 18 months old, he started attending the child care center on campus here at Highline. Jim immediately became Grandpa Jim, a title that I borrowed from Jennifer Jones and James Payton. And Jameson and I always stopped at the office first to see Grandpa Jim before heading over to the child care center. Sometimes I would leave the two of them together while I photocopied handouts for my classes or took care of some small errands. One day, Jameson got his hands on a Sharpie and proceeded to scribble all over the side of Jim's metal filing cabinet. I was mortified when I got back to the office, but Jim didn't seem to care. He never bothered to clean up Jameson's artwork off that cabinet. Grandpa Jim was much more forgiving than Mom and Dad would ever have been. So some of Jameson's earliest memories include Jim, and Jameson made a point of visiting him at the retirement center in his last month. At the office, I was often there to see Jim's interactions with students, and his visitors far outnumbered mine. Some of the students simply needed motivation, and Jim was always ready to prescribe a viewing of his favorite motivational movie, Rudy. Many came to him regularly for class information, time management strategies, life advice, or just to chat. They soon earned the nickname Lemonites. The most devoted of the Lemonites fiercely were devoted to him. Almost all of the visitors were subject at one time or another to the embarrassment of facing off Jim in the penny game. How many of you know that one? Yeah. He would invariably snatch the penny from their hands and prevent them from taking it from his. He especially liked to trick his athletes. He claimed it was about making a connection with students, and that was certainly part of it, but I also think he simply enjoyed winning and putting those youngsters in his place.
Not all the time.
I also had the opportunity to hear many of his stories as well as his catalog of sayings, which I called Lemonisms. There was ready, 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 when he was in fact ready. I'm off like a herd of turtles when he was heading to class. And well, that's a deep subject. And probably all of you could add a dozen others to this short list of Lennonisms. I can't ever remember any time when he was angry or disappointed. It probably helped that we had similar interests and similar backgrounds that we grew close. He grew up in southwest Idaho and I grew up in southeast Idaho. Both of us played baseball in college, although he was on a national championship league, and I never even approached that level of accomplishment. Both of us benefited from having married strong, capable women. In fact, he always referred to Lorraine as the general. And of course, we shared an interest in American politics and history, including a conviction that General George C. Marshall never really received the historical recognition that he deserved. It was a sad day for Highline, and for me personally, when Jim announced that his retirement in 2011. We were losing a great friend and colleague, but we understood that he needed to take care of Lorraine. It was even a Saturday several months ago when he called me to let me know that he had been diagnosed with cancer and didn't have long to live. When I went to see him, he was tired but in good spirits. He told me that many of his friends and former students, no doubt many of you that are here today, had already been in touch. He said that he wanted to see Lorraine again and that he was ready to go and that he wasn't afraid. I trust that the General is once more giving Jim his marching orders. Like all of you, I will miss Jim's smile, his energy, and even his stories, no matter how many times I heard them. And yes, I heard many of them over and over again. If the measure of a good life is what you leave behind, there is no doubt that Jim Glennon had a good life. He touched thousands of lives as a family member, a teammate, a friend, a coach, a teacher, a colleague, and more. And everyone's life he touched was better for it.
Hello, I'm Barbara Gorham. I'm Mount Rainier High School class of 1982. And I really appreciated what Doug said earlier about how he, it was very clear, I wrote it down exactly what he said, what he was going to do. He knew exactly what he wanted to do for the rest of his life. And that Mr. Glennon had this impact on me. I went into law and politics, and it was exactly what I wanted to do, and it was just always very clear from his influence that that is what I should do. And I remember I was working back in DC as a congressional aide 10 years after I graduated, and I came back and he asked me to speak to his class, and so I did. And I remember at the end he said, "Barb, you wouldn't believe it. Kids these days, they don't know the difference between the federal deficit and the national debt. Can you believe it?" To which I had to kind of scratch my head and go, okay, yeah, the difference between the federal debt. So, yeah, love Mr. Glennon. Definitely my favorite teacher and a major influence, personally and professionally, for me.
Hi, I'm Bob Bauer. I taught psychology here, and my office was in a situation where I would come down the spiral staircase and I could see into his office. And students were there all the time, and he could get away with things that none of us here at Highline could. He could say things to students like, "You know what? You don't know this? You're all a bunch of idiots." And then I would see him stop, usually the basketball players on campus, to do the penny trick. For those of you who don't know it, he would hold his hand like this and then have the student underneath it and try to snatch the penny out of his hand, and then he would reverse it and do the same thing with them, and he'd always beat them, and he'd turn to one of the students and say, how old are you? And he said, and the student said, I'm 18, 19 years old. He said, can you imagine how fast I was when I was your age?
Hi, Jack Birmingham. I used to work here. I was vice president for academic affairs when someone told me that they had this really great teacher around and he needed to come and do some work at Highline, and we should take advantage of that opportunity. And he came in, we had a conversation, and it all began here. What a magical tour he had, engaging students in ways that people probably didn't think was possible. I had the extra advantage because I had a couple of children who showed up here as Running Start students and stayed along to finish, and they loved his classes. So I would hear this at home, and every once in a while I had the privilege of sitting in his class to do an evaluation, because that was the structure of the institution at the time. And he genuinely was a magical instructor. And I had the good fortune of having a very dear friend that I went to graduate school with who came and taught here. You'll see a picture of him every once in a while there, Emmanuel Chiabe from Cameroon. And Glennon always used to say, you know, that's my brother from another. And it truly was. And together they did some amazing things in engaging students and getting them to see possibilities that they probably never thought were possible. So on a day like this, at least we get to smile a little bit and remind ourselves of what good people can do at a very grassroots level, because they believe so much in what might be possible for the kids they touched. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Joe Seal Moore. I'm the class of 1976, along with Debbie here, and another person back there. So I wanted to tell my story of Glennon, of the the most important thing that happened between us. So in the fall of 1975, Glennon and I came out together. I was a lesbian, he was not. But I was really struggling because I had grown up in a very conservative family, and I was raised to believe it was better to be dead than gay. And so I was suicidal. And Glennon and I had already touched each other's lives through his teaching. And I ended up in the University of Washington psych unit as I struggled with this. And the staff there, even though it was at risk to their job, one of the staff members says, "Don't tell anybody I told you this, but it's okay to be gay." And Glennon came and visited me in the psych hospital, and we talked about this. And Glennon came from a very conservative background also, and his thinking was, well, you just have to meet the right man. And I talked to him about my pain, about struggling with this acceptance, and he listened, and he told me later that he drove home, and as he drove home to Federal Way, he hit the steering wheel and he said to himself, "She is not wrong. You have to change your thinking. You have to change your thinking." And he did. And thereafter, he was a great support to me, but every student that came up to him that was struggling with whether or not they were gay and how to come out and all the other ways that people are in the fringes of society, he was there for them, and he made that change in his thinking, and it's an incredible thing, so I just wanted to share that.
Thank you. My name is Mike Emerson, and we had 3 kids who we turned over to Jim Glennon in a very successful operation, and that was the first period that we were close to Jim. And then later on, I was a trustee here at Highline College, and I was in the same meetings, of course, with Jack, and we were meeting in a room that was adjacent to what was called Glennon's room. And from time to time, our meetings would be interrupted by pure chaos. And we would go outside, we'd call a recess, and we'd go outside, and there would Jim be outside, leaning against the door, just saying, "Isn't this wonderful? Isn't this wonderful?" He says, "They're speaking to each other." And they really were speaking to each other. And then the other story I'm going to tell is an unusual one. You won't have heard it in other places, but Jane, there is a goat to this story. In this story, and I'm the goat. But anyway, it's not Jim. That's for sure. He tried to protect me. Jane, my wife Jane, and Lorraine went on a trip to China together. They were roommates, and Jim was working here, and I was working at Boeing, and all of a sudden I got a call from Jim, who identified himself, and he said, "Do you happen to know what time the girls are coming home tonight?" And I said, "Girls, home?" And I did know enough. I said, "I'll find out." So I did find out that they were coming in on a China Airlines flight into California, but then coming north on a domestic flight with Alaska. And so I called the Alaska service reps, customer service reps, and I identified myself, I identified the problem, and then she said to me, "It's against company policy to reveal flight information and passenger information." So I said, "Well, maybe you didn't understand. You know, let me go through this again. It's really kind of important to us because we're lost, Jim and I." And the same answer, "No, that's something that we don't do as a matter of policy." And so I guess I might have been crying at the third time, but I told her one more time that it was absolutely vital that we learn when they were coming home. And she said to me, Well, that is against company policy, and I'll just repeat that. She said, but if I were you, I'd get my butt down to gate A15 at 5 o'clock tonight. So thanks to Jim, who at least clued me in.
Hello, I'm Roxana Cardenas, though in the class of 1990, I was Roxana Davila. And my friend Erin and Holly and Bobby, we all, when we heard that he had some health challenges that were not going to be recoverable, we decided to go down and visit him in November. And we've all known that he was a remarkable man. We've all known he's an incredible educator. But to go, to have the drive to want to see a teacher that you haven't seen for quite a long time, there's something else going on there, right? And then not only did we go and see him, but we kept getting interrupted by other students from other classes that were coming in to see him. This is remarkable. This is not normal. And I think part of it made me want to reflect on that later on. And we all have our personal stories with him. We have the classroom stories. One of the things that I think made him unique, that I think many have recognized and touched upon, is that he didn't just teach the subject matter, he taught us how to think critically. He made the art of debate not just be about winning, but about learning. To debate, to learn the other person's perspective. And I remember in the classroom, something that stood out to me in my memories is really building my core values as I went on into adulthood, is that he would love to lob a topic out there, something spicy, for you to nosh on. And then he would have you not only debate and defend your position, but then he would have everybody switch and defend the other position. I thought that was such an eye-opening experience, but if it got too heated, he would say, okay, everybody pause. Do you see absolute value in the person that you're talking to as a human being? Can you look at the person you're debating right now and say you see absolute value in them as a person? And if not, we're going to put this on pause until you can. And if you could, knock it out. And I thought that was incredible. It's what is missing in a lot of debate now is the humanity part of it. So that stood out to me. His incredible skill in making learning exciting and cool and fun at Mount Rainier. It was a culture. There was a waiting list for a class at a not private school. Hello. But all of that was amazing and incredible. But what was probably most important for me as an ADD student, ADHD, who had been told her whole life, you're very, very bright, but I couldn't maintain my attention and focus until I started taking advanced AB courses. IB, AP, then now my brain was engaged in holding attention. It's what happened in between those classes. Mr. Glennon and Bev Forsloff created a magical space for juniors and seniors to go and hang out. This was their personal time. It was they shared that their classrooms were back to back against each other, and then there was an area that was supposed to be personal office space. They converted it into kind of a lounge where we could debate and talk about ideas and take a nap in a cozy chair if we needed it, or whatever. It's that in-between time that I will never forget. He was tireless in his generosity of spirit and how much he valued each and every one of us as people in addition to the learning. And that came through time and time again. And I will never forget it because it changed the course of my life. I wasn't college bound until I was starting to get grades that could get me college bound. And that's because of Jim Glennon and Beth Forsloff.
Well, in 1974, I was Julie Levitt, Julie Angelson now. But Mr. Glennon has always been one of my top teachers, remembering from high school. And a couple of things I wanted to share with you was you all know how he made history so much fun, and it wasn't just, okay, now we're gonna read about blah, blah, blah. He looked up and found out all the dirt on everybody he was teaching on, and he would share it with us. And also, he could never stand still. He taught like he coached, and he would always be going like this, and then he'd come up, and then he'd go, and then he'd come over here. And one time, we challenged him to stand still. You can guess about how long that lasted. And he couldn't, he was just going, and then he goes, okay, I'm the teacher, I'm done. And off he went again. And then getting people involved in different things. I saw the McGovern buttons out there, and that clicked a memory that he encouraged us to go out and campaign. And I remember putting on my little red, white, and blue outfit, my blue skirt, and my little crochet vest, and going out with this other young man. And you know, we weren't even old enough to vote, but we're out campaigning for McGovern in a Republican neighborhood. And we discovered just how rude adults can be. Slamming doors, we got spit on, we got sworn at, and I went back just devastated. He goes, so what did you learn from this? You know, and this is what politics you need to, how can you change that? So those are just a few of the things that I remember about Mr. G.
I'm going to borrow this space so I can keep the paper down and my Kleenex. Thank you, Krista. Mr. Glennon's classroom, or should I say portable? I think when I started in 9th grade, it was a portable. Let's recognize how Mount Rainier had grown, right? This was the 80s, and I love the fact that there are people here from the early 70s. Yeah, I was born in the early 70s, and class of 89. And I think I was calculating, so when I had Glennon as a teacher, he was about my age. That's kind of fun. So the bright energy that Mr. Glennon always portrayed, you know, it was like the sun shining in a room. And you know, whether it was a penny trick or a Saturday Night Live political skit that might be showing the morning before class, that was the space where there was going to be joy. I will add that I have a 12-year-old son. I had kids kind of late. And Mr. Glennon, it was still beating my son in the penny game in August. So just, as you know. Now, my son, you know, he's not some super speedy guy, but he's a decent athlete. So between History in the Making and 11th and 12th grade, I had the benefit of having Mr. Glennon probably 6 or 7 semesters over that time. And anybody remember the assignments? We sometimes had to come up with questions, everything from local history up through international history. You had to generate questions. It was kind of hard to find local history, wasn't it? That was my challenge sometimes. Mr. Glennon was not afraid of tackling hard topics. And it's tough because we're at a moment right now where history teachers are feeling some difficult pressures. And I will say that my husband is a world history teacher, and my husband is Jewish. And when he is trying to show a film including a Palestinian story alongside an Israeli story right now, there are parents ready to call that inappropriate. The bravery and courage that it takes for history teachers to do the work that is so critical to have happen is immense. And so I actually add here that, you know, if it's your children or your grandchildren and you want to encourage teaching, I want to make that pitch. Mr. Glennon had joy, and where did that joy come from? So much of that joy came from his work as a teacher. Thinking about that safe space, yeah, I was a lefty then, and I'm still a lefty now. left wing, not left-handed, you know, but I would debate. I had friends in that class that might have been as conservative as could be. And you know what? I'd leave history class at Mount Rainier, and maybe the most conservative kid in the class was then driving me to a math class at Highline Community College. So that, knowing that space, that importance of being able to have those kinds of debates, the importance of that is really important. And I think that we have to be cautious about things that might be moving to us to a space where history classrooms are not getting the chance to have that. Mr. Glennon had a way of connecting to the quieter students in the class. And you know, he would read their faces, and then he would push them. He would push them, well, what do you think? And I think you knew that there was going to be this respectfulness of different people with different comfort levels of what it was to be ever speaking in a class. But on the other hand, he was going to push you. He was going to push you to be thinking about the challenging topics that were at the table. I will say that my college experience was again affected by Glennon. Do you remember his tradition of his past students would come to the school the day before the end of the winter break? And he opened that space. I don't know, he was often struggling to get enough chairs for the number of the people that were coming back to say hello to Mr. Glennon and to share stories. And that became a powerful experience that certainly affected my life. So I went to college then, affected by that, and I majored in Ron Abramson, David Price, and Mr. Glennon. I was a math and international relations major. So while my career has been in math education, my mission and the populations I served have been connected to the conscience and the development of that conscience in Mr. Glennon's U.S. history classes. At the start of this week, I was modeling lessons in 3rd and 5th grade classes in Jacksonville, Florida, with underserved populations, which is part of the network that I serve. Have you ever seen 9th graders when they, 9-year-olds, sorry, these are 3rd graders, right? 9-year-olds when they want to be called on? It's like they want to know, is there a correlation between the height of my hand and the likelihood of being called on right now? But that's not high school kids, right? When I visit lots and lots of classrooms K through 12, and when kids are in middle school and high school, they're kind of holding themselves back. And all of a sudden, too often, they're not, that participation in life that we see in elementary is not there. That's not what was true in Mr. Glennon's class. Mr. Glennon had that excitement. Mr. Glennon probably had to make those choices about who to call on because a lot of people wanted to be involved with the conversation that was happening. So I will say that I live in New York City right now, but I get to visit my family often, and those visits have always enabled me to stay in touch with Mr. Glennon and to keep visiting him. And again, the joy he would express about the life he led, and the life he led as a teacher, remains this very special thing. I know that joy that comes with students. And it is an amazingly beautiful thing. It doesn't happen everywhere for everyone all of the time that we might expect it. But Mr. Glennon made it happen for 30 years of teaching high school and for another 20 years of teaching community college. And that has been a story that, as I've talked about this trip coming back to this memorial, that was his passion and his love. That is how he spent that time. I do know that the work he invested in that is a ton. To think about all of the videos, he knew which second and minute to go to point out what he wanted to be pointing out. that takes a lot of time and work. All of those study guides with the questions to push our thinking, to make sure that we were capturing the key pieces were just essential. I'll just close with last month, my work took me to Memphis, and I was able to visit the Lorraine Motel where Martin Luther King was shot. And this history is alive because of the experience that I had in his classroom. That is what brings these important things to life and makes learning and thinking about our history and being ready to talk about our current history so important.
Hi there, I'm Jamie Creek, class of 75. Yay. Anyway, I was a student athlete underneath Coach Glennon and Mr. Glennon. He had a lot of influence over my life and also my brother's lives. I got two other brothers, Scott Creek, who's graduated in '69, Mark Creek, who graduated in '71, and myself. I remember him as a coach, and he'd always get so excited during practice and games. He'd make sure that you were involved in every play, every aspect of the game. He would come up to you and grab a hold of you by the shoulder pad, shake you, and get you going and get your adrenaline up. And yeah, he was a fun guy. He was always there for the athletes. He was there for me. I remember quite a few times that he'd come and reach out to me. I lost my mom when I was a sophomore. I lost a really good friend of mine, Jeff Birdquest. He was a fellow athlete at Marinier. And then I broke my leg my senior year of football. Each time he would come to me and talk to me and gave me some encouragement. And he was there for me. I really, really, really appreciate it. As a brother of three student athletes that served under Coach Kelly, Coach Glennon. We have stories about him. We've talked about the stories and how he influenced our lives, and he was just a great man. We really appreciated him.
So my name is Steve Kennedy, and I'm from the class of 1984. I loved Mr. Glennon in many ways. He was a magnificent teacher, friend, and mentor. When I was going to school, as a sophomore, it was the first time I met him in his history and Mehic class, and I was sitting right there. Now, I was much shorter than I am today, back then. And I also lacked a lot of confidence at the time. I was quiet, shy. Now you could call me a recovering introvert. So he said, Steve, who are the truly needy? And I came up with a wonderful answer, well, those who truly need help. And from then on, my nickname was Truly Needy. Because he could see my eyes just twirling around, trying to figure out what to say. And the other thing is he was a terrific coach and mentor to me and a lifelong friend. Because after graduating from high school, I thought, well, I wanted to follow his steps, go into teaching and become a high school teacher and a coach. And he said, no, because he saw the potential of everyone and what direction they could best go. So he mentioned me and coached me to go in a different path. And so I'm blessed to have had a mentor and a friend like that who led me to a different path and a 30-year career at Boeing. And the last thing I'll say about Mr. Glennon is that he's a special person in many ways. And I think everyone has spoken about that. And one of the things is that some of you have mentioned the simulations that he would run during U.S. history during our junior years. And, well, our class did all right. We found a creative solution. Now, he might say something different, but I will just say that the solution that we did was that we went to the superintendent and said, hey, we want to form a union here. lo and behold, we got his buyout at the time. So he was a special man, and we kept together for over the years. Every year we talk, and one of the things that I'm really blessed with is the ability to not only think on my feet, but also one of the things that we had going on was, as was mentioned earlier, being able to take a subject and go from the left and to the right. So for example, if Mr. Glennon said, well, I like vanilla ice cream, and you said that you like chocolate, well, there'd be a great debate. And so the last thing I'll leave you with is in college at the University of Washington, my best friend who also had Mr. Glennon as well, we would take subjects and we would debate them, whether they be history, political, whatever. So if he went over here to the left, I would be over there on the right, and then vice versa. So I learned so much from him, and I've just treasured his friendship and his mentoring and coaching over the years. He was a wonderful person and loved him very much.
Hi, I'm Mike Campbell. I taught at Highline for many years. And my statement here is in connection with our previous speaker, who mentioned that history teachers are under attack in the world today. And some of you don't know, but Jim was under attack, and it hasn't been mentioned yet. And that's when I met him. He came to Highline College because he had gotten fired at Mount Rainier. He'd gotten kicked out. He was too damn liberal for the board. And that was tough for him. He didn't have a job to teach. You know, no audience to talk to. That's hard for Jim. If you know Jim. Anyhow, he came to Highline, and I think he'd already talked to Jack Birmingham, and Jack had said, well, you should give it a try here. So I think I found out about it when he was already assigned a class. And as the division chair, it was my job to go and observe. And so somewhere in the second or third week, I popped into his class, and I was like, wow, this guy is something. And so I was thrilled and immediately sought him out, talked to him about his teaching, and talked to him about other things. And we talked quite a bit about what happened at Mount Rainier. And I was glad to be a listener to some of his pain over that. And then he moved on because, by golly, he taught at Highline then for, I don't know, how many years? I can't remember what year he started. 15 years, yeah. And we were really glad to have him. So, thank you.
My name is Ed Holmes. I'm class of 75 with Jamie, Mike, and Carol over there. So my relationship with Coach Glennon is like this. If you want to start off on the bad foot, I got that. I knew Coach Glennon from 9th grade. He was there at Olympic. I got most improved player and shook his hand. And then the next year, sophomore practice started in the summertime and showed up to one practice, and then I missed one. And so we were in the gym getting done with Mr. Kelly zipping around all over the place. We were in there, and I was cross-thing, and I knew who Coach Glennon was, and all of a sudden I seen him look at me, and like, his demeanor went from instant, the hat spun around. And you know, if you know Coach Glennon, when he was on a mission and on a purpose, he did waddle like a turtle at high rate of speed. He came right up to me and backed me up against the wall, and he started in on me, and he said, your nickname now is Meatball. If you ever miss another practice, that's when I learned Jim's shoe size and where it would be. And I can say in class, he helped you learn because he actually cared. Yes. And as students and as people and as folks, we always know when somebody's feeding us a line of BS and when it's the truth. The next time, Coach Glenn, for the next couple of years, he pounded on me how to dip, hit, and drive, how to pull and drag and leg. Was you're built like me, Meatball. You got to play like me. You got to hit it. You got to hit it. You got to hit it. So between junior and senior year, worked out because all the new linemen that year, if you started, you got these brand new water air helmets and stuff. And so I got my starting position. But we were doing a drill in practice. And, you know, it was like that 18-inch board for linemen, and you had to chop and shove off and stuff like that. So this Glennon was holding the bag, and I just drove him off the board, and he tripped and fell over backwards. By the time he got up, that hat was spun around, that face was beat red, and he said, "Meatball, get your butt back up there, you're not doing that to me again." He got all the weight and all that stuff. But during the struggle, sometimes life happened. Coach Glennon was always there. He pulled me off to say, "How's it going today? How's your family? How's things going?" In a very quiet, caring demeanor and stuff. And so I went in the Marines, and then I would meet up with Daryl when he was back, and we'd go down to Boston Pizza and have beer and pizza with Coach and go around. We went to a couple of basketball games with him and kind of stayed in touch and different things like that. But for me as a person, the most telling part was a couple of months ago. I took Daryl over there to meet Coach Glennon at his place. It was going to be a 30-minute meeting. It lasted for 6 hours. And sitting in there, and during the middle of the meeting, he just looked at me, and he shook my hand, and he said, "You're not a meatball anymore."
That this man made each one of us feel like we were maybe the only person on the planet, at least for a while. I just wanted to say briefly that I remember just loving to walk into his classroom at Mount Rainier, class of 71. I know you're here. Yeah. It was electric. It was absolutely, I remember walking in and my whole day changed. It was so intellectually invigorating for a kid, for a teenager to walk into his room and be challenged as if we were college students in grad school, thinking about deep things. So that was something I really loved. He led us through some really difficult conversations in his class about abortion, which had just become, or was about to become legal, about Vietnam. We debated Kent State. We had some very heavy conversations in his class, and he was there to guide us through those. And I will say, and he will say, he told that story many times about how some of those conversations went. They were peaceful, they were respectful, and we got to the crux of the issues, and somebody talking about how each person was respecting the other, the absolute value of the other person. He didn't use that term then, but he taught us what it meant. So I just want to thank him for that. Really love all your stories, and then I've just got one tiny one. Recently I was sitting with him, and he's talking about students he'd known and where they sat, and he brought up Holly and Bobby, and I know you're here somewhere. Bobby, I don't know you guys, but he was talking about you, and he was talking about the romance that he witnessed. Exactly. He was watching us. He was watching you, and so he was waxing on about the romance he was watching develop in his classroom. And I'm thinking, wait a minute. I mean, I'm one of the 16,000, just one of the 16,000. He must have seen this happen other times. So there I am, kind of in my sordid questioning. I'm saying, okay, who else? Did you see any other romances developing in your classes? You know, and he turned to me and he looked me in the eye and he said something so profound, it almost makes me teary to repeat it. I thought he was going to tell me, yeah, so-and-so and so-and-so, and yeah, there was this pair and they're still together. The words out of his mouth next were just the love I had for my students. And I thought, is that romance? I guess it is, you know. And I think that's the crux of Jim Glennon. I think love is the crux of Jim Glennon. Love and talent. So.
Hi, I'm Diane Lehman, now Diane Dorsey, class of Mount Rainier, or class of 1983 Mount Rainier. We've got a few people back there. And when I was 17 years old, a senior in Mr. Glennon's class, I was planning to go to the University of Puget Sound. I was going to be in the honors program. And then I got an acceptance from Harvard. And my family didn't have a ton of money. That was going to be an expense. I didn't know how I would do it. And I was talking to Mr. Glennon about what I should do. And he said, well, you have to go. If you don't go, someday you're going to be 40 years old now. I'm 58. But you're going to be 40 years old, sitting behind a desk somewhere and thinking, I should have. You know, what if I had done that? So that was influential to me. Mr. Glennon's opinion meant a lot, and I decided I would go to Harvard. He came to see me off at the airport before I went. And the other thing that he did is he gave me his home phone number, just in case I ever needed anything. And I never had to use it, but it meant so much to me, because I mean, I had a loving family, I had other people I could call on for support, but just to know that there was a caring adult out there who believed in me, who pushed me to exceed, to reach my goals, and who was there if I ever needed anything. And I just think that's the epitome of Mr. Glennon.
How can anybody call you anything but beautiful? That was Jim. My name is Bill, or Liam Louie. I'm one of his cousins. I'm actually running interference for Wayne Sparks, who's has a much bigger pedigree and a lot more hair. And one of the first things that's happened is something you folks mentioned about where you sit in class. This is Jim Glennon's first day of class. He walks in the door. Teacher says, "What is your last name?" He says, "Glennon." "Right up here." The second one is maybe you baseball players might remember. Jim was a good catcher. And the Emmett Huskies were playing the Payette Pirates at Payette. I've been in the stadium. That's a longer story. Jim was catching. Emmett Huskies had somebody on second. And the pitcher was worried. Well, what he should have been worried about was what Jim was trying to tell him. Harmon Kilbrook's coming up next. It was all silence, and he pitcher went it down through the center. Now in left field, I've seen it out there, is an irrigation ditch about 320 feet or further. The left fielder went head first, tried to catch the ball into that irrigation ditch. The last thing is an inspiration that you folks gave us. I'm thinking that we could form a civics test, a 3-question civics test, for those who are running for election. And remember, we promised to vote, right? You don't have to tell who. Welcome to America. But the first question is, what is the highest office in the land? I know the Jim Glennon answer. Citizen! Second question. Who works for who? The people we elect and hire, or we, the people? You already know the answer. I won't even mention it. The third one is one that we all need to answer. It's a multiple choice. Choose one. Republican, Democrat, or American. You think about that answer. But Jim would tell you, whoever you put in first place runs the herd. You cannot choose God and Mammon, or Joshua saying, draw it in the sand, choose this day whom you will serve. One. I know how Jim would answer. I can't tell you. I'm going to let Wayne have this if he'll come up here. But I have to tell you, you are beautiful. you have enriched us. You are what's going to make America great. Love, truth, and life stand against the other kind, selfish, ignorant, negative, S-I-N. Take that ball and run with it, Wayne.
I'm from the class of 1963 in Rosalia, Washington. That is on the other side of the mountains, in case you haven't been, between Pullman and Spokane Lake. And I want to tell you that we trained Mr. Glennon. I was the first class. And this is one of his first roommates. I would like to introduce you to Mr. McKay, also from Rosalia and a close friend of his. He's just as beloved of all of us as Mr. Glennon was. And I want you to know they were very good friends. And you got him started on the right path, didn't you?
I guess that means I have to say something. And we all know he had the unrealistic ability to motivate and inspire his students and his ex-students. And I was going to say something, maybe, but it's already been said. And the only thing I got to say, I think you ex-students need to know this. He and I were pretty close, so he'd stay with me. And he was over there for 5 days at the last reunion we had. And so we talked a lot about life in general. And he'd go, you know how lucky we are to get to live as long as we get to live, McKay? I said, yeah, I think so. Well, you know how lucky we are to be school teachers? I thought, well, there sure was a lot of interesting experiences, and not all of them were good, but he was really, really excited about that. And guess what? You ex-students. He came over there and he was talking about, he was going to, this was a year and a half ago in June. I'm sorry, I got kind of a sore throat, but I hope you hear me. A year and a half ago, he was so excited to come to the Rosalia all-class reunion. And in 3 months was going to be the Mount Rainier all-class reunion. And I know darn well he probably got together with his community college students also, because he was very close to even, I'm sure, their level. And you guys don't know this, but what he was doing, he was in a lot of pain. And he wanted to go meet his wife. And you guys didn't know this, but he was giving his last goodbyes. And he wanted to, in his way, he was trying to thank you, saying goodbye to you, and thanking you for helping him to have such a wonderful life. And so I'm sure, Glennon, you might be up there listening to us, but I think I'm speaking on behalf of your community college people and your Highline community and Mount Rainier and Rosalia, that we're saying goodbye to you and we're thanking you for everything you did for us. And I hope we get to see you again,
Bill's cousin. I was just going to hide in the back row and not say anything, but I had the tremendous pleasure of spending a few hours with Jim a few months ago. We kind of lost touch, and I think maybe it was because he was so immersed at one time in care for his lovely wife, Lorraine, and then later his own health was failing. So we hadn't seen each other for a number of years, but I had an absolutely wonderful afternoon with him. I was surprised to see that Coach Glennon only weighed 128 pounds. But I can tell you, as many of you know, his mind was as sharp as could be, sharper than mine, of course. But we had a wonderful afternoon of talking and reminiscing, and he reminisced about his time at Rosalia, and his time at Mount Rainier and at Highline. And I remember that he and I had a talk many years ago about the time he was finishing up his career at Mount Rainier. And at that time, he was absolutely in anxiety because he was facing the prospect of not teaching, not being in the classroom any longer. And that was very, very troubling to him. Some of you may have encountered him during that time. But we had an interesting conversation about how difficult it was going to be for him to give up his years and years of teaching, and how much he loved the classroom and how much he loved his students. And so I was very excited that he went on to have a pretty lengthy career right here at Highline College, and I had a chance to visit him once and walk around with him, and of course half the students on the campus seem to know him. But anyway, Jim is just such a fantastic guy, and I want to thank all of you for being here. It's been so wonderful to hear all of your reminiscences about your time with him. And as Bill kind of alluded, we have a couple of cousins, I call them brothers by another mother, who couldn't make it here today. And they're part of the clan of family that were part of Jim's family. And I was so happy to hear that Sharon's son, I don't want to embarrass him, but Sharon's son is videoing this event. And I understand, I don't want to give this away, but I think it's going to be available on YouTube, right?
Yes, it is.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
It's just wonderful that you're capturing this, and those of you who are here and spoke or didn't speak but remembered your time in his classroom will be able to see that again, and it will be a real blessing for my cousins and friends of Jim who weren't able to be here. So thank you so much.
All right, I think that unless there's anybody else that would like to talk, I think we'll kind of go out. And I know you're all maybe a bit hungry or would like some coffee, some water, and or tea. So please feel free to let's eat a little something, because I'm not bringing all that stuff home, okay? Thank you so very much. God bless you.